Hello, friends of the Silent Husband Club. It's good to see you again. Sorry for our long silence, we've been rebuilding behind the scenes. From now on, we'll strive to bring you a new story every single day. The night my house fell quiet, the leash still hung by the door, warm from a hand that wouldn't return. People say betrayal is loud. They're wrong. It whispers while you're at work, it laughs in a park, and it wears the price tag of a bargain. If this opening pulls you in, please subscribe, hit the like button, and leave a comment. It truly helps the channel grow, and it lets you know when the next story drops. I'm not here to make myself a hero. If anything, I was asleep at the wheel while my life drifted toward the guardrail. I'll tell it from the beginning, but not the tidy beginning people prefer. I'll start from the end, from the echo that followed the door closing behind Clara. Rain worked the roof like 1,000 soft knuckles. The hallway had that hollow, rented silence, though the mortgage said otherwise. On the wall, by the shoe rack, the leash hummed like a question I couldn't answer. My Belgian Malinois, still a teenager in dog years and stubborn as a tide, lay with his head on my knee and watched me the way only a creature without words can watch a man losing his own. Liverpool was supposed to be our fresh paint. New streets, new cafes that didn't know our faces, new neighbors we could reinvent ourselves for. Clara said the light here was kinder, even when it came through a cloud. I agreed because I wanted to believe it. We traded the familiar for a semi-detached with a generous garden in Wavertree, the kind of place where you learn the seasons by the stains on your paving stones. I told myself this was a chapter heading. We would fill it with laughter, food, friends. And a dog. That was my idea, a loyal shadow to ground us when the city kept shifting underfoot. My hours got long quickly. A promotion is a polite word for a larger cage. Mine came lined with performance charts and late trains. Clara told me she didn't mind, she liked nesting, she said. She liked choosing curtains, arguing with the lawn, learning the shapes of our new sky. I wanted to believe that too. When I brought home the Malinois pup, coal mask, clever eyes, a fuse of energy wrapped in fur, Clara fell for him like he was medicine. We named him after a river, something steady. I told myself that promised steadiness for us. The first weeks were chaos in charming clothes. Shoes disappeared on principle. Table legs turned into ideas. The pup learned sit as a rumor, stay as a myth. Clara cared with the intensity she gives to everything, books stacked by the bed about working dogs and impulse control, videos in her search history, notes on the fridge about schedules and patience. I would come home late to see her eyelids tired and her voice gentle, like she was soothing both the animal and herself. I'd promised to help more tomorrow. Funny word, tomorrow. The calendar is full of them. The heart lives on what you did today. Training was harder than any article suggested. The pup was bright enough to negotiate treaties, and just as stubborn about signing them. Clara started talking about getting help. It sounded practical, like a splint for a small fracture before it turned into a limp you carry for years. She did the research. She showed me prices. Most of them made sense. Liverpool rates for professionals who knew how to step into a living room and change the weather. And then there was one name that didn't fit. Damien Cole. It wasn't the name that bothered me, it was the fee attached to it. £20 a session. 3 evenings a week. He said he charged less because he believed in access, because dogs deserved better and owners needed relief. It read like a promise and felt like a hook. I stuck my concern behind my teeth. When Clara finds a corner of sunlight, she leans into it with her whole weight. I didn't want to be the man closing blinds. Let's meet him, I said, and told myself I was being open-minded rather than lazy. Damien arrived on a Thursday, and the house changed temperature. Tall, dressed like mirrors had never told him no, he stepped into our hallway as if he'd been here before. His smile came easy, his jokes came faster, and his eyes didn't rest on anything for long, except when they did, and then it felt like a hand on your shoulder that didn't belong there. He had the confident grip of a man used to doors opening. He talked about dogs like a sermon, loyalty this, hierarchy that, a cosmos of rules that sounded less like love and more like conquest. The Malinois watched him the way young soldiers watch a drill sergeant, alert, tense, unsure if the next command would come with praise or a shove. Clara laughed at his jokes, at first the way you laugh at wind chimes, politely, because they exist, then in a thinner tone I didn't recognize. When Damien teased me lightly, politely, with that small bite you can deny later, I smiled along, the civilized way you do around a stranger your wife has already decided to trust. He used the word alpha and I felt something old and stupid rise in my throat. I didn't feed it. Feeding wolves is how they stay. He took the leash without asking. He told the dog to heel, voice low and indelible like ink. The dog moved. Not the easy, relational move of recognition, but the tight, sharp arc of compliance. It works, I thought. It works and I don't like how it works. Training ended with our dog panting, sitting square, eyes bright, tail still. Damien patted the skull between his ears like he was stamping a passport. You've got a strong one, he said, winking at Clara. He just needed somebody to speak clearly. After he left, the owls exhaled. Clara was radiant in the way people glow when a problem seems to meet its solver. She talked about confidence, about structure, about how the dog finally listened. I nodded, moth to her light. He's affordable, she added, and the word dropped into me like a pebble that somehow found a bottom it shouldn't. I told myself we'd watch. We'd see if his bargain came with a bill later. We scheduled the next 3 weeks, Mondays, Wednesdays, Fridays. I told myself I'd be present for more of them. Work disagreed. It always does. I missed 1 session, then 2. Clara took videos, short clips that showed a dog moving like a diagram and a man explaining like a prophet. She skipped the moments between the moments, and maybe that was enough to keep me sleeping. Liverpool got colder in that sneaky way the sea helps with wind you can't see until it's under your coat. The garden went brown at the edges. The pup's legs lengthened, he tested doors with his nose, rules with his eyes. When I did make it home in time, Damien's jokes had more elbows in them. He could be charming. He chose not to be, at least with me. And Clara stepped sideways when he filled a doorway, a small movement you make in crowded rooms. A polite retreat. The sort you don't notice until you do, and then you can't unsee it. I could have said, I don't like him. I could have said, not in our house. I told myself it would sound controlling, that my discomfort came from jealousy of his competence with the dog. I told myself many things men tell themselves when they prefer to be liked than to be right. I waited. Waiting is an action, by the way. You choose it. It looks like nothing, but it has teeth. When Clara suggested taking the dog to Sefton Park in the mornings to proof commands, it sounded reasonable. Distraction is what you train against, and parks provided in generous supply, joggers, prams, geese with ancient grudges. She came back flushed and happy, the pup spent, her words dotted with Damien's phrases. He says we're building a ladder of trust, she told me, eyes bright. He says dogs crave a spine to lean on. Spine. Lean. Ladder. The metaphors stacked like new furniture you haven't decided you like. I noticed her phone more often in her hand. That isn't a crime, not anymore, phones are prosthetic limbs. Still, screens snapped dark when I walked into rooms, and laughter moved into the other side of the house. When you love someone, you learn the weather systems of their silences. Hers shifted. I asked gentle questions and got gentle answers that fit too neatly. I told myself not to become the husband who inventories receipts, who follows shadows through apps. I didn't. I went to work. I brought home my tired face and my careful voice. And yet, even in the carefulness, a splinter turned under the skin. I could feel it when I fed the dog at night, when his bowl clicked tile and he looked up as if to ask if I'd finally arrived. I could feel it when Clara said we and I didn't know whether the pronoun meant her and me or her and something else, someone else, an idea, a plan, a man with a voice like instructions. The morning that sealed it wasn't the morning you think. There was no lipstick on a cup, no text that read like a confession. It was a Saturday I should have called mine. A day off promised and delivered. I woke before Clara, listened to her breathe, and decided to make coffee the expensive way, the slow way, as if care could be boiled into beans. When she stirred, I asked if she'd like me to come to the park. A small pause. Maybe tomorrow, she said gently. The dog focuses better with fewer distractions. I swallowed. I smiled. I watched her lace her shoes. When the door closed, I sat for a full minute with my hands wrapped around the mug, heat needing something to do with itself. Then I stood and followed, not too close, not heroic, just a man walking a few blocks behind the person he loves, listening to the city name his cowardice with wet tires and traffic lights that take too long to change. Sefton Park was gray and generous, geese stitching insults across the water. I kept my distance, a line of trees between us, and I waited. He arrived with the kind of punctuality that isn't accidental. Damien, hands in pockets, the wind working his coat like it belonged to him. Clara's face lit the way a window brightens when someone pulls the curtains. I didn't confront them. Not then. I watched him take the leash. I watched our dog obey the way a muscle obeys a reflex. I watched Clara stand a fraction too close and then shift away a fraction too late. From the path, a runner passed, a boy really, tall and flimsy as a gust. Damien raised his voice, just enough steel to make the dog's world narrow to a single line. My heart did the opposite. It made a mess. But that is a story for another part. For now, all you need to know is this: when people ask me when it began, I don't say the city, or the dog, or the man with the discount. I say it began with quiet. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that arrives when two people are talking to different ghosts in the same house. The kind that makes a leash look like a question. The kind that waits at a door and listens for footsteps that don't belong. I stood there in Sefton Park, hidden behind the trees, my breath fogging in the cold air as if even the city wanted to reveal me. Damien's presence carried itself like a verdict. He didn't shuffle or hesitate, he moved with the confidence of someone convinced the ground was made for him alone. Clara's face, God, the way it lit when she saw him, wasn't the face of a woman greeting a trainer. It was the face of someone finding a missing piece, or believing she had. The leash passed from her hand to his like a ritual, and our dog responded instantly, as though loyalty were transferable for the price of a voice. I watched every small detail, every shift of her weight. The way she laughed a little too quickly at his remarks, the way she didn't step back when he stepped forward. These weren't betrayals in the courtroom sense, no paper trail, no lipstick stain, but betrayals of rhythm, of intimacy, of unspoken vows that live in the spaces between. My gut twisted as Damien commanded sharply, and the Malinois snapped into position. It was obedience, yes, but obedience stripped of trust, carved into the animal by pressure. The boy running past nearly collided with the taut leash, and for a heartbeat the dog lunged, teeth flashing, before Damien's hand yanked him short. My heart clenched harder than the lead rope. Clara laughed nervously, brushing it off like a minor mishap. Damien shrugged, unbothered. For me, it was a glimpse of something jagged beneath the surface, a danger neither of them seemed to register. I walked away that morning with my jaw tight and my mind louder than the crows overhead. Back home, the house felt like a stage after the audience leaves, props in place, lights off, silence swelling. Clara returned later, flushed and cheerful, telling me the dog had done so well. Her phone buzzed once, a quick light she silenced before setting it face down. She smiled at me with the practiced ease of someone who wanted to believe the smile was enough. I nodded, because what else does a man do when the evidence is all in shadows? The following weeks blurred into the same uneasy pattern. Damien came less to the house, at least when I was there, but Clara's park excursions grew longer, stretching 2 hours, sometimes more. She started dressing with more care before those walks, pulling on a jacket that fit too well, touching her hair in the mirror before grabbing the leash. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to demand answers. Instead, I swallowed my suspicion, telling myself I would not be the paranoid husband I always swore I'd never become. But every night, when I lay awake beside her and heard the faint buzz of her phone against the nightstand, I felt the weight of silence pressing down on my chest like a second blanket I hadn't asked for. One evening, I broke. I told her straight, "Damien makes me uneasy. I don't like how he talks to me, how he talks to you, how he acts in our home." She laughed lightly at first, then stiffened when I didn't laugh with her. "You're overreacting," she said, her eyes hard but her voice too quick. "He's eccentric, sure, but he's brilliant with a dog. Do you really want to start all over again with someone new?" I told her I didn't care about starting over. I told her it wasn't about the dog anymore. She dropped her gaze, her shoulders folding in as if carrying something heavy. Finally, with a sigh, she said, "Fine. If it matters this much to you, we'll find another trainer." The words were right. But the tone was all wrong. They sounded like surrender, not agreement. Like she was giving me the answer I wanted, but not the truth I needed. So we hired Ruth Hargreaves, a steady, professional woman with eyes that measured problems instead of people. Ruth trained with calm, with patience. The dog responded in a way that felt earned rather than forced. No showmanship, no unnecessary dominance. Just work in progress. By all accounts, it should have been a relief. And yet, in the quiet corners of our house, tension lingered. Clara was distant in ways hard to pin down. Not cruel, not cold, just absent. Her laughter came less often, her smiles less easily. She seemed to drift into thoughts that didn't include me, holding her phone like a lifeline, retreating into herself when she thought I wasn't looking. I told myself it was the move, the adjustment, the strain of new routines. But deep down, I knew it was something else. Something that had already begun when I wasn't paying attention. And once a crack appears in the foundation, you can't pretend the house is safe. You hear it in the walls at night, shifting, waiting. I wish I had been wrong. But I wasn't. The days that followed had a strange rhythm on the surface, normal, but beneath it a pulse I couldn't ignore. Ruth came and went with professionalism, and our dog began to shape into something steadier, more responsive. Yet even as his training found balance, Clara drifted further from me. She disappeared into her phone, her eyes flicking to the screen with that quick, guilty motion people have when they don't want to be caught smiling at something they shouldn't. At night, she turned just slightly away in bed, enough that I could feel the absence more than see it. Her body was there, but her mind was walking in some other park, under some other sky. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe she was just lonely. Maybe the move had hollowed her out in ways I couldn't fill, too many hours of me chained to work in her left to build a new life from scratch. But the excuses wore thin the longer I watched her linger by the door before a walk, smoothing her jacket, checking her reflection. She had always cared about her appearance, but this was different. It was ritual. It was preparation. And every time she came back from Sefton Park, there was a glow in her cheeks I hadn't put there. A kind of satisfaction that didn't belong to Ruth's calm instructions. No, it was something sharper, something secret, and I hated myself for knowing who had given it to her. One Saturday morning, when Clara laced her shoes with too much care and grabbed the leash with too much eagerness, I decided I couldn't sit at home again pretending the silence of our walls didn't roar in my ears. I followed her, far enough to remain unseen, close enough to feel the weight of every step she took. The park was damp, the air heavy with the smell of wet leaves and earth. I saw her cut across the wide path, not toward the crowded fields, but toward the secluded grove where the trees hum low like conspirators. My stomach turned before I even saw him, because I already knew. Damien emerged as if he'd been waiting all along, his hands in his coat pockets, that same smug ease about him. She smiled, my wife smiled at him in a way I hadn't seen in months. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was real, and that was enough to slice something deep inside me. I stood there, fists curling and uncurling, while they spoke in tones too soft for me to hear. They moved together with our dog between them, Damien taking the leash, Clara watching with a focus that was half admiration, half devotion. I couldn't hear their words, but I didn't need to. The language of their bodies said more than words ever could. A laugh here, a touch too close there, the rhythm of two people orbiting each other as if pulled by some hidden gravity. They weren't reckless, not yet. But secrecy is its own intimacy, and they shared it freely, right there in the open, as though my absence made it permissible. I turned away before they saw me, my chest hollow, my jaw clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. The walk home felt longer than any journey I'd ever made. Every street corner mocked me, every window whispered what I didn't want to admit: Clara was lying. She was keeping a part of her life hidden from me, and she had chosen Damien, to share it with. That night, when she returned, she was calm, casual, even affectionate. She stroked the dog's head, smiled at me like nothing was wrong, and told me about how much progress he was making. I stared into her eyes and asked a simple question: "Did you see Damien today?" She froze, only for a fraction of a second, but enough. Then she blinked, smoothed her expression, and shook her head. "No." "Why would you ask that?" Her voice was steady, but it was too quick, too practiced. I knew, and the knowledge burned worse than any confession ever could. From that moment on, I stopped asking. I started watching. Every movement, every glance at her phone, every excuse to go for longer walks, I cataloged it all. She thought I was blind. She thought she could play both lives, one in the open with me and one in the shadows with him. But shadows have a way of clinging to the people who walk in them, and soon, they were all I could see when I looked at her. And with every passing day, I felt the part of me that still believed in her begin to crumble. The Sunday it all came apart was colder than it should have been for spring, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and makes the day feel older than it is. Clara laced her shoes, tied her scarf, and told me she was taking the dog for a long run. Her voice was light, casual, but her eyes flickered the way they did whenever she tried too hard to sound natural. I told her I'd stay in, catch up on paperwork. She kissed my cheek, quick and soft, and laughed. I waited. I let the seconds stretch into minutes, the minutes into half an hour, before I followed. My steps felt heavier than the wet pavement beneath them, as though I was walking not just toward the park but toward a truth I already dreaded. Sefton Park was alive with runners and parents, dogs chasing balls, the chatter of Sunday normality. But Clara didn't drift toward the crowds. She cut across the grass and disappeared into the quieter stretch by the water, where the trees grew close enough to muffle sound. I slowed, heart pounding, and hid myself just far enough away to see without being seen. Damien appeared on time, as though summoned by her presence alone. Hands in his pockets, his shoulders squared with that infuriating ease, he walked straight to her. She smiled, not the polite, practiced smile she wore at dinner, but something warmer, something she hadn't given me in months. He reached out and touched her back as he spoke, casual, deliberate. She didn't pull away. I stood frozen, fists clenched, heat rising in my chest despite the cold. They laughed together, the leash in his hand, our dog responding to his every command as though I didn't exist. The boy from weeks before, another runner, lanky, quick, darted past, and Damien snapped a command. The Malinois lunged, teeth flashing, only stopped by a hard yank of the leash. The runner, startled, muttered a curse, and kept going, shaking his head. Clara laughed nervously, brushing it off. Damien smirked, unconcerned. My pulse roared in my ears. This wasn't training anymore. It wasn't even about the dog. It was about control. About Clara. About me. I stepped out from behind the trees before I could stop myself. Clara's eyes widened the moment she saw me, panic flashing across her face as though she'd been caught stealing. Damien turned slowly, that damn smirk softening into a look halfway between amusement and challenge. I stopped in front of them, my voice low, dangerous, every word heavy with the weight of betrayal. What the hell is going on here? Clara opened her mouth, but nothing came out. She looked like a child caught in a lie too big to untangle. Damien, on the other hand, seemed to enjoy the tension. Relax, mate, he said smoothly, his tone soaked in arrogance. It's not what you think. The cliché burned like acid in my ears. My laugh came up bitter, hollow. Oh, really? Then explain it to me. What exactly am I looking at right now? Clara stammered, It's not what it looks like, but her hands trembled, her eyes filling with tears she couldn't disguise. The truth was already written on her face. Damien stepped closer, just enough to make my blood rise. Don't be dramatic. Nothing happened. You should be thanking me, your dog's finally learning. His words were meant to provoke, and they did. Something inside me snapped. I lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar and shoving him back a step. He caught himself, eyes narrowing, the smirk fading into a cold stare. Don't touch me, he hissed. Then stay away from my life, I shot back, my voice cracking with rage. The air between us was electric, violent, ready to explode. Damien raised his hands in mock surrender, his lips curling into a smug half-smile as he glanced at Clara. I think you two need a little talk. With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps unhurried, as though he'd already won something I hadn't realized I was losing. I stood there, chest heaving, hands shaking, watching his figure shrink into the distance before turning to Clara. She stood motionless, pale, her eyes wet with tears that finally spilled over. Say something, I whispered, my voice raw. She swallowed, her lips trembling. I never meant to hurt you. I laughed, bitter and sharp. But you did. Over and over. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting match could have been. She had no defense, no excuses that mattered. Only the truth, hanging there between us, undeniable. And I knew in that moment that whatever we had built together, whatever dreams we carried into this new city, into this house, into this marriage, it had already begun to crumble beyond repair. The walk home after that confrontation was the longest of my life. Clara trailed behind me, her footsteps hesitant, as though the weight of every lie clung to her heels. The rain had started again, fine and steady, soaking us both in silence. I didn't look back at her. I couldn't. The dog walked between us, restless, sensing the storm in the air, his ears twitching to the rhythm of our silence. By the time we reached the house, my hands were trembling not from the cold, but from the fury and disappointment that had burned a hole through my chest. Inside, I stood in the middle of the living room, dripping onto the carpet, waiting for her to speak. She lingered at the doorway, eyes red, body tense, as if afraid that stepping fully into the room would mean stepping fully into the truth. "How long has it been?" I finally asked, my voice lower than I intended, each word cutting like glass. She swallowed hard, her lips parting, but what came out was pathetic. "I don't know." I laughed, bitter and broken. "You don't know? You can't even tell me how long you've been lying to my face?" She shook her head, her tears spilling freely now. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "I wasn't trying to hurt you." Her words felt small, meaningless, crushed beneath the weight of what I had seen with my own eyes. "But you did," I said flatly. "Every walk. Every time you looked me in the eye and swore he was gone, and then went to him anyway. You hurt me every single time." She tried to defend herself, reaching for excuses that sounded like air slipping through broken glass. "I was lonely. You were always working. He listened. He noticed me." Her voice cracked on the last words, as if that confession was the closest she could come to honesty. For a brief second, I felt the sting of guilt, the truth in her words about my absence, my endless hours at work while she built a life alone in a new city. But guilt doesn't erase betrayal. It doesn't erase the lies, the secrecy, the way she let another man walk into our life as though he belonged there more than I did. "I worked to give us this," I said, my hand sweeping across the room, the house, the very walls that now felt like a prison. "And you threw it away for a man who charges 20 quid to ruin families." She collapsed into a chair, her face in her hands, sobbing now. I watched her, searching for some flicker of the woman I once trusted, the woman who stood beside me when we packed our lives into boxes and dreamed of fresh beginnings. But all I saw was a stranger, and all I felt was the hollow ache of something already broken. "I can't trust you anymore, Clara," I said finally, my voice heavy with finality. She lifted her head, her face streaked with tears, eyes wide with desperation. "Please, don't say that." I shook my head slowly. "It's already true." The silence stretched, unbearable. At last, I spoke the words I hadn't thought I'd ever have to say. "You should go." Her breath caught in her throat, as if I'd struck her. She whispered, "No, please, we can fix this." But there was no fixing it, not now. Trust, once shattered, doesn't glue itself back together because someone cries hard enough. I turned away, unable to watch her break any further, because watching her cry almost made me forget the lies. Almost. Upstairs, I heard drawers opening, the sound of clothes being pulled from hangers, the slow, quiet rhythm of a woman packing up the wreckage of a marriage. I stood in the living room, staring at the leash still hanging on its hook, realizing that when she walked out that door, it would be me, the dog, and the silence she had left behind. Minutes later, the front door closed with a soft click, final in its simplicity. I didn't chase her. I didn't call out. I just stood there, my chest hollow, my hands heavy, knowing that even though I had made the only choice I could, the victory felt like ashes in my mouth. The hours after Clara left bled into one another, each second dragging its heels across the floorboards of an empty house. The silence was different now. Before, it had been filled with suspicion, with questions that hummed like static in the corners. Now it was vast, unbroken, the sound of something finished. I sat in the living room, still damp from the rain, staring at the door she had closed behind her. The leash hung untouched on its hook, swaying slightly as though the air itself was unsettled by her absence. My dog pressed against my leg, his head heavy on my knee, and I wondered if he understood the shift better than I did. Animals have a way of sensing endings, of knowing when a pack has been torn apart. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in the bed we had shared, the sheets cold where she once was, her perfume faint but lingering, like the ghost of a life that had already slipped away. Every memory played on repeat, the laughter in our old flat, the hope we carried into Liverpool, the first time I watched her cradle the pup as though he were a promise of something better. And then the lies, the secrecy, the way her eyes darted away from mine, the sound of her voice when she said it's not what it looks like. The truth is, it had always been exactly what it looked like. I just hadn't wanted to believe it. Betrayal doesn't arrive as a thunderclap. It seeps in like damp, quiet, invisible, until one day the walls crumble and you're left standing in the ruins. Days passed, and I adjusted to the new reality with the numbness of someone who has no choice. I fed the dog, went to work, came home to the stillness. The routines were the same, but the air had shifted, everything was sharper, emptier. Ruth returned for training sessions, and I told her Clara had gone to stay with family. She didn't pry, didn't ask questions, just worked with the dog, her calm voice grounding me in a way I didn't expect. She showed me how to be firm without cruelty, how to lead with trust instead of dominance. And slowly, I began to see progress, not just in the dog, but in myself. Each command obeyed felt like a step away from chaos, a piece of order stitched back into my fractured life. I thought often about what Clara had said, that she was lonely, that I was gone too much. She wasn't wrong. I had buried myself in work, convinced that providing was the same as being present. Maybe if I had come home earlier, noticed the quiet sooner, things would have been different. But guilt is just another leash. It keeps you tethered to what-ifs and maybes, when the truth is staring you in the face. She made her choice. She lied, she betrayed, and she kept betraying until the truth walked into the open. My absence may have opened the door, but she chose to walk through it. One evening, I sat in the garden with the dog at my side. The rain had stopped, and the city lights glowed faintly in the distance, soft and forgiving. I thought about fresh starts, about how Liverpool had once been a symbol of hope for us both. Now it was a graveyard of promises. But perhaps, I realized, it didn't have to stay that way. Perhaps it could be a place of rebuilding, not for us, but for me. For the man who had lost everything, except the one creature who had never lied to him. My dog shifted closer, warm against me, his loyalty quiet but absolute. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something that wasn't grief. It wasn't joy either, but it was a beginning. I don't know where Clara is now, and I don't spend my nights wondering. Some questions rot you from the inside out, and I've learned to stop feeding them. What I do know is this: I will never confuse silence with peace again. Silence can hide rot, it can mask betrayal, it can smother the truth until it's too late. But peace, that's different. Peace is a leash hanging by the door, untouched because the trust between man and dog doesn't need proving. Peace is coming home from work and being greeted by loyalty that doesn't ask questions, doesn't keep secrets. Peace is the absence of lies. As I sat there, with the leash swaying gently in the evening breeze, I made myself a promise. I would start again. Without deception. Without shadows. Just me, my dog, and the quiet kind of silence, the kind that doesn't betray you. The kind that waits, patient and loyal, until you're ready to walk forward again.
Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, shocked you, or simply made you think, don't keep it to yourself. Leave a comment, your thoughts, your story, your truth. Subscribe for more raw, real, and unforgettable confessions. And if this story made you feel seen, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. You're not alone here. This channel is a safe space for those who've been betrayed, broken, and rebuilt.